Okay, good evening. We're starting chapter 10 of Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and it's about the mitzvah of Tefilin. You know that the mitzvah of Tefilin is a very important and precious mitzvah. And of course, for Chabad, there's the extra special cherish with the mitzvah of Tefilin of one of the Rebbe's 10 mitzvah campaigns, and perhaps one of the most famous ones, which the Rebbe invested very much energy into. Okay, the mitzvah of Tefilin is also a very precious mitzvah. Also is coming in continuation to the previous chapter, where we spoke about the preciousness of the mitzvah of tzitzis. So Tefilin are also a precious mitzvah, for the entire Torah is similar to Tefilin. The word similar is probably not a good translation for the word huksha. The entire Torah is equated to Tefilin, as the pasuk says, "Leman tihiyeh Torah Hashem beficha," so that the Torah of Hashem be in your mouth. When the Torah talks about the mitzvah of Tefilin, it's actually in this coming up in next week's parsha, in Parshas Bo, through fulfilling the mitzvah of Tefilin, the whole Torah will, so to speak, be in your mouth. So the whole Torah is equated to Tefilin. As someone who does not put on Tefillin is reckoned among the transgressors of Israel who sin with their bodies, i.e. Tefillin are worn on the arm and the head. The Gemara says it's a karkafta l'manach Tefillin. Somebody who does not wear Tefillin is a transgressor of Pesha Yisrael b'gufay. And the Gemara says some not good things about that. Now, there are different opinions as to the correct reading of that Gemara. The context that the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is putting it in is to describe the importance of the mitzvah of Tefillin regularly, and saying if you don't put on Tefillin, the assumption being if you ever don't put on Tefillin, if any day that you don't put on Tefillin, then you are in this category of transgressors of Israel. However, there is another reading of that Gemara which says the kakafta l'manach Tefillin l'yolam, somebody who never put on Tefillin. And that's why, if you've ever heard in the Chabad jargon, the term karkafta, when you're doing miftzayim or whatever it is, and you are able to put on tefillin with somebody who has never put on tefillin before in their life, that is something extra special, because you sort of, you help them graduate from this category of somebody who has never put on tefillin. So that's two different readings in this Gemara. Similarly, one who puts on invalid tefillin not only fails to perform the mitzvah, but he also recites many brachas in vain, which is a grave sin. So if your tefillin are not kosher, besides the fact that you're not fulfilling the mitzvah, every day you make the bracha on the tefillin, and if they're not kosher tefillin, then that would be a bracha levatala. Therefore, you should be careful to purchase tefillin from an expert and God-fearing scribe. Similarly, the tefillin, right? So there's a lot of competition and a lot of perhaps stress in the market. People need to make a living, and are they going to give your tefillin the exact attention to detail that they need, that they require? So make sure that you're buying it from a God-fearing scribe. Similarly, the tefillin strap should be purchased from a trustworthy person to make sure that the leather was processed for the sake of tefillin from hides of a kosher animal. And even to this day, every few years, you hear in the news some sort of scandal about certain tefillin straps that were discovered to really have some sort of plastic coating on them. The reason why the manufacturers would do that is because that helps the black staining stay strong. Let me just interject here with a little bit of background information, which some of this is going to mention throughout this chapter, but not all of it. The halacha is that the straps of the tefillin have to be black. That is, there's 10 laws of tefillin that are halacha l'Moshe Misinai, that are biblical in nature. They doesn't say them explicitly in the Torah, but they are received from tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu. And one of those things is that the straps have to be black. The straps also have a certain width, which is the width of a sa'ira, a barley bean, and I think they say it's 9 millimeters or 11 millimeters or something like that. and it has to be black. Now, the box of the tefillin, what we call the bias, the actual box of the tefillin, strictly speaking, this box does not need to be black. Of course, the custom is for it to be black, and that's the beauty of the mitzvah. But if a little bit of the black paint is fading on the box, then that does not disqualify the tefillin. But if there is black fading on the straps of the tefillin, then that could disqualify the tefillin. It would depend exactly how much is faded and where on the strap it is. It's common that at the end of the tefillin, over here, at the sort of the end of the hand strap, that's where it would get faded. That doesn't really matter, because even if it's faded on the end, and so you would consider the end of the tefillin to be cut off, usually that would not disqualify the tefillin, because, yeah, let's just leave it at that. Usually that wouldn't be a problem. But another area which is sensitive is the area at the very top where you wrap it around and it goes in and out of the knot or the loop, depending on what custom your knot is tied according to. But either way, there's a lot of friction over here. And here it could get, the friction could cause the paint to fade. Now, if a little bit of paint fades, then that doesn't matter, as long as you still have the requisite, let's say 10 millimeter width of the Ritzua. Let me stop sharing the screen so you can see this in bigger, right? As long as you still have the requisite 10 millimeters or so of blackness, if the side is white or gray, that doesn't matter. But if there's a lot of fading and too much of this is faded, then you would consider the tefillin the straps to be cut off over there, and that could certainly be a serious problem. Now, which part of the strap has to be black? So common practice, the common opinion, the way we paskin lahalacha, is that the front of the strap has to be black over here. Now, there is also the opinion of the Rambam that the entire strap has to be black, the sides, the bottom, all of it. This is not the common practice to be makbid. Some people are makbid in it, not everybody. Personally, I do have those ritzuas, and the reason I personally do like it is because if the tefillin, the ritzuas that are black all around are not only black all around, they are also black through and through. And that way, even if you get some friction which makes it fade, the under level is still going to be black, so you don't need to worry about that. However, there is, like I said, a lot of, every so often you hear these scandals on the market, and especially these ritzuas which are black through and through, in order to get the paint or the dye through and through to make it, and that it should retain it. So, there were some manufacturers who were mixing in plastic, and then that became a whole scandal. So you want to make sure to get tefillin and ritzuas with a reliable hechsher. Similarly, the tefillin strap should be purchased. Yeah. Also, to make sure the leather was processed for the sake of tefillin from hides of a kosher animal. But because of our many sins, the temptation to purchase tefillin and tefillin straps from anyone who sells them cheaply, even though their tefillin are invalid. Therefore, every God-fearing person should consider this. If he was concerned to select proper material for his clothing and utensils, then certainly he should not economize and worry about the cost when buying articles to serve Hashem, blessed be his name. And I often tell this to people, even people who are not living a observant lifestyle. When I go, often have opportunity to help people put up mezuzahs. And how much does a mezuzah cost? And sometimes they have a big house and they the bill for all the mezuzahs could be hundreds of dollars and sometimes even more. And I tell them, look, you could get a kosher mezuzah for $40 or maybe even a little bit less, but like, do you buy, is anything else in your house that you buy just barely scrape away, or do you try and get something better quality? So get a $50 mezuzah, get a $60 mezuzah. It's certainly preferable, and okay. You should therefore be careful to purchase only those tefillin that are definitely kosher, even though they cost more. You should take care that they're always in proper order and that the bottom and straps are always black. So even though, like I said before, the boxes don't have to be black, but you should always be careful that they're black. And so if you check your tefillin, strictly speaking, from a halachic perspective, there's never really an obligation to check your tefillin, as long as externally there's no obvious damage. Obviously, if they get waterlogged or something, then you would have to check them. But as long as from the outside, they don't need to be. Then there's no obvious damage, and there's no halachic obligation to check them. However, the Rebbe did encourage to check tefillin often, and hopefully, if you check them with a quality sefer, you may want to mention it. Ask him to check it over, make sure it's all black, and sometimes he'll touch up here in the corners where it's a little bit faded, to touch up that it should actually be black. Just smear the straps with oil regularly to ensure their blackness, but they should not be smeared with the oil of a fish called fish rum, because this oil is derived from a non-kosher ingredient. And nowadays,
excuse me, I'm sorry, Rabbi. I raised my hand, but maybe you didn't see it. So I thought that you're supposed to have your fillings checked like 3 times every 7 years or something.
No, mezuzahs. It's from a strict halacha perspective, mezuzahs you're supposed to check twice in 7 years. Tefillin never have to be checked, strictly speaking.
Okay.
You have to, as long as you check them when you bought them, right? As long as when you bought them, you verified they were kosher. There's no actual obligation to ever check them again. And the Gemara records a story that Hillel had tefillin from his great-grandfather. Grandfather, great-grandfather, I don't remember. And the implication is that he had not checked them.
Okay, I wonder why there would be that significant a difference between a mezuzah and a tefillin.
Probably, right. I don't know. It could be because mezuzah is more exposed to the elements, certainly if it's an outdoor mezuzah. In general, nowadays, you see even this thing that he's saying here, to smear the straps with oil regularly to ensure their blackness. For most ritzuas nowadays, that's not necessary. Obviously, the system that we have in manufacturing tefillin, on the one hand, we're still making sure that everything is done by hand and for the sake of the mitzvah. But nevertheless, the tools and the methods and the technology that we're able to use, we're able to ensure a much longer lasting product than they used to. So whereas it used to be you had to keep on painting them to retain their blackness, nowadays you shouldn't have to really be painting your ritzuas very often, maybe every couple of years, depending on how rough you are on them. And some people do have in that tefillin bag a little, thing of that tefillin paint, and you'll touch over certain parts of their ritzuas from time to time. And even the tefillin themselves, the box of the tefillin, nowadays, most tefillin are made, certainly the good quality ones are made from gassus. That means they're not made from the hide of sheep. They're made from thick leather from a cow, which again, in the olden days was much harder to accomplish, because you have to really sort of manipulate it to make it into, it has to be a proper even square, and it has to be the corners have to be exact corners. So nowadays we have much heavier tools, so that's easier to accomplish. And obviously these are much more sturdy. A pair of tefillin like this, there's no reason it shouldn't last a lifetime. But if you have dakas, actually the Rebbe's tefillin were dakas. They were from the skin of of cattle, of sheep or whatever, goats. And those tefillin are much more delicate. You could literally squish them in your hand if you're not careful. And they weren't as sturdy, or certainly didn't last as long. It is advisable to be careful when you put the tefillin in and out of the boxes, to be delicate on the corners. If you have this little cover on your shaliad, certainly if it's plastic, in the olden days they were cardboard, but nowadays they're usually hard plastic, so your corners are protected unless this falls off, so you want to be careful. When it comes to the shel rosh, to the head tefillin, I try to get into the habit to put them in sort of on like a slant, like this, so that I'm careful on the corners. But even so, you could see that the corners on here, on these ones, could probably do with being touched up. Another issue is the tefillin. The head tefillin has these 4 boxes. According to the Alter Rebbe is strict that there shouldn't be any glue in between these boxes. They shouldn't be bound together, because otherwise they lose their status as being 4 boxes, and it's just considered 1 box. But then the problem becomes that if you don't have any glue in them, they could sometimes spread apart, and then they're no longer square. So, some sofrim will take a millimeter, and nowadays you have these things that can measure it down to the fraction of a millimeter and say, oh, it's not exactly square. But the common, the more common practiced approach is that as long as to the naked eye it looks like a square, that's fine. But if you look closely at this, you will see that over here at the top, it's tiny, tiny, a little bit wider than it is on the bottom over here. And if I squeeze this very tight, I can sort of make it a little bit more thing. So these are all things in the maintenance of tefillin that have to be kept up with. Now he points out here that you shouldn't smear it with the oil of this fish called fishron because it's derived from a non-kosher fish. That's also connected to the verse that he mentioned above, that the Torah should be in your mouth. And because the Torah refers to tefillin being in your mouth, we derive from there that all the components and the ingredients of the tefillin must be made from kosher ingredients. So, for example, they also use this thread that's made to sew the tefillin shut, to sew the box closed. That thread comes from the hide of an animal, and again, it has to come from the hide of a kosher animal. Perhaps one of the most common issues. There's a number of. Steve, is your hand still raised? Okay, I lowered your hand.
No. I'm sorry. I'm mute. No, I'm good. I'm good.
Pay attention to it. Where was I? Yeah, there are a number of issues with the kashrus of tefillin, which the Alter Rebbe is more strict about than others, and some of them we'll mention as we're going along here. But that's why it's a good idea to make sure you buy your tefillin from a Chabad sofer. And if you are currently strict to do things according to Chabad custom, and when you bought your tefillin you were not, then that may be a good idea to have them checked and let the sofer tell you whether or not it meets the Alter Rebbe's criteria. I'll make a spoiler alert. I'm still waiting to finalize the details, but the coming 2 Sunday mornings, this coming Sunday and the following Sunday, instead of hearing me, there's going to be a guest speaker who is somebody who's a friend of mine in New York, who very expert in all things related to tefillin and mezuzahs, and he's hopefully going to give us a nice overview of many of the relevant halachas and history and specific contributions of the Alter Rebbe to the halachas of tefillin. So look out for those details. Probably very little overlap with what we're talking about tonight. If the tefillin were damaged even slightly, or if the stitches tore, right? So if these little stitches that are holding the box shut, if they tear, then you should immediately consult a rabbinic expert to determine their validity, right? That does happen, not very commonly, but it can happen that those threads sewing it shut could be ripped. You should be especially careful regarding the corners of the batim, and specifically of the shorosh, because they frequently rub against other objects, which cause dents, making them invalid. Now, the reason why the hand tefillin has this cover is for 2 reasons. First of all, it's to protect the corners, but I'm saying the reason why the hand one has it and the head one doesn't have it is for 2 reasons. Number one, the head one we don't want to cover. We'll see later that you shouldn't even cover it, at least not entirely, with your talis. So even if you have your talis over your head and even over a little part of the tefillin, but it shouldn't be over the entirety of the tefillin. Whereas the shaliyad one may be covered. Some have the custom to specifically cover the shaliyat tefillin and sort of pull down the sleeve over it. The Chabad custom is not to be specific about that, and probably because it is the Chabad custom to have large tefillin, and because you have larger tefillin, it's going to be harder to pull your sleeve over it. But be that as it may, the shaliyat tefillin also rubs against the side of your chest, so the corners would be very damaged if it didn't have this protection. Also, very frequently when tefillin become old, a separation appears on the upper side of the shorosh, making it invalid, right? That's probably referring to, like I said before, the 4 boxes part. You should be greatly concerned about all these matters. All who are careful in the observance of the mitzvah of tefillin and treat them with sanctity, not speaking of trivial. All who are careful in the observance of the mitzvah of tefillin and treat them with sanctity, not speaking of trivial or secular matters when wearing them, will have his days lengthened and is assured of a share in the world to come. as it says, Hashem aleichem yichyu. Hashem is upon them. Hashem is upon them means that they're wearing tefillin, for they carry upon themselves the name of Hashem in the tefillin. And then the verse continues, and they shall live. And in all these things will my spirit live, and you shall give me health and give me life. So, being careful to treat the tefillin with sanctity is will bring your days to be lengthened. The word tefillin means judgment and admonishment. The word tefillah in biblical Hebrew means to judge. You have in Parashas Kitzur, it says, "Nosan beflinim." If somebody causes a certain damage, he has to give it according to the judges. Now, the word pelila has two lameds in them. Pelila. Tefillin only has one lamed, tefillin, but that's why if you the Hebrew vowelization of the word tefillin, if you look over here in the lamed, there is a dot. The dot in the lamed means that it's a strong lamed, tefillin, and that's sort of in the place of two lameds. So technically the word should be tefillin, but instead of saying tefillin, we make it a strong lamed, and by putting the dot in it. So why is the tefillin? What have tefillin got to do with judgment? Because the tefillin are testimony and proof that the divine presence dwells upon us, as it is stated in the scriptures. All the people of the earth shall see that the name of Hashem is called upon you, etc. Our sages of repressed memories explain that this refers to the tefillin of the head, upon which is formed the letter of the shin of Hashem name. So the verse that says the people of the earth shall see the name of Hashem is called upon you is referring to the head tefillin, because the head tefillin has on its side the shin, which is an acronym for Hashem's name. And therefore you should not cover the shalrosh completely with the talis, because it has Hashem's name and it should be visible for quote unquote all the peoples of the earth to be able to see it. Now, let's just review some of these things. It mentioned that tefillin has the dogish in it, so it's a strong lamed tefillin. You may sometimes hear when people say the bracha, they say lahoniach tefillin, to emphasize the lamed. That's the correct way to pronounce it. This pasuk, v'ro kol amei haaretz kishem Hashem nikra lecha, that the people of the land will see it doesn't bring here the end of the verse. The complete verse is that the nations of the land will see that the name of God is called upon you, and they will be in awe of you. They will fear you. And this is the pasuk that the Rebbe invoked in 1967 in the eve of the Six-Day War, when he introduced the Tefillin campaign, and with the declaration that extra adherence and fulfillment to the mitzvah of Tefillin will cause the enemies of Israel to retreat from in front of us. So that was based on this thing. Now, he mentioned here about treating the tefillin with sanctity, not speaking of trivial or secular matters in them. So very important. Recently in Beis Menachem, we've adhered to the hachlata of not talking politics during davening. But certainly, while you're wearing tefillin, one should be careful what you talk about. When we were in yeshiva, after our bar mitzvah, in those initial years of wearing tefillin, there was a strong emphasis not to talk at all words other than prayer or Torah study in tefillin. And certainly, if you could do that, that's certainly very praiseworthy. But what he says here is not to speak trivial and secular matters in them. It may also be appropriate to mention at this stage that the Rebbe very strongly encouraged and pushed and instructed that nowadays everybody should wear Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin. Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin are basically, we won't get into the whole thing right now, but in brief, it's that there's two opinions as to the order of the 4 paragraphs that are written in tefillin, which order they go in. There's Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. And even though the halacha follows Rashi from a mystical perspective, and according to some authorities, even from a halachic perspective, it is very important to wear tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam, and therefore the Rebbe strongly encouraged that. Now, when you wear tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam, so there's 2 ways to do it. One way to do it is, and this is the many Sephardim who do this. If you ever daven Shachris at the Sephardi Shul in Tui. There are at least one, maybe more than one person over there who does this, is they have very, very small tefillin, and they wear Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam simultaneously. They have two small hand tefillin that, take some practice, but they put them both on their forearm, and two tefillin on the head, one in front of the other, and they wear Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam simultaneously. But the common Ashkenazi practice and Hasidic practice is to wear Rashi tefillin for davening and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin after davening. Now, when we wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin after davening, so it's important to wear them straight after davening, not to then go and do other things and continue with your day and put them on time sometime during the day. It should be done immediately after davening. And one of the reasons for this is because we don't say a bracha on Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin. We only say a bracha on Rashi's tefillin. But by putting on the tefillin, the Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin, juxtaposing it as much as possible to when we said the bracha on the Rashi tefillin, then that makes that, at least on some level, the bracha also quote unquote pertains to the Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin. Now, what reminded me of that is the talking with tefillin, because even if you did talk words other than prayer while you're wearing tefillin, some people are careful that from when they take off the Rashi tefillin, not to talk any words and not to talk at all until they've put on the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, so that by not talking in that time in between the two tefillin, that is less of an interruption and therefore allows for the bracha to pertain to the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin as well. I'm not going to get right now into all the minutiae and detail of exactly how that works and if it works, but certainly that is a praiseworthy custom. Okay. Any questions, thoughts, or comments before we move on to the next sif? Okay. The time for putting on tefillin in the morning begins from the time when you are able to see and recognize a neighbor with whom you are slightly familiar at a distance of 4 amos. Nowadays, that just means you go to Chabad.org/Zmanim and you find the earliest time for talis and tefillin. The tefillin should be put on after you put on the talis. The reason for the precedence of the tzitzis over the tefillin is because the mitzvah of tzitzis is performed more frequently. There is a principle, tadir v'she'eni tadir koidem. Whenever you have two mitzvahs, that one of them is more frequent than the other, so the more frequent one takes precedence and it is fulfilled first. So that's why we put on the talis before the tefillin, because talis is a mitzvah that applies 7 days a week, whereas tzitzis tefillin is a mitzvah that applies only 6 days a week. So talis is more frequent. The reason for the precedence of the tzitzis over tefillin is because the mitzvah of tzitzis is performed more frequently, being performed during weekdays as well as Shabbos and Yom Tov, whereas the mitzvah of tefillin is performed only on weekdays. And the rule is that choosing between a regularly performed mitzvah and one that is not performed as regularly, the regularly performed mitzvah takes precedence. However, okay, now, because there is another principle, there's two principles here. One principle is tadir v'she'eni tadir kodim, that the more frequent mitzvah takes precedence. The second principle is ein ma'avirin al mitzvahs, that when you mitzvah shebal yodcha al tach mitzena, he's going to say, the pasuk says that you have to watch over the matzahs, referring to not letting the matzahs become chametz, but the word matzahs can also spell mitzvahs, so you have to watch the mitzvahs, and that means to say that if a mitzvah comes to you, don't let it pass, don't pass over it. So as soon as your hand engages or confronts a mitzvah, you have to do that mitzvah. So that's why when we put away our talis and tefillin, we put it in a way that the tefillin are on the bottom of the bag and the talis are on top, so that when you open the bag and you reach for the contents of the bag, you're going to reach for the talis first, because you don't want to reach for the tefillin first, because then you get into this question of, what should I do now? On the one hand, I must put on tefillin because I've already picked them up, and you're not allowed to let go of a mitzvah once you have it. On the other hand, I have to put on the talis first because the talis is performed more regularly. So that's why we put a talis and tefillin away in such a way that we should encounter the talis first. If you happen to touch the tefillin first, even though they are still inside the bag, you must put them on first and then wrap yourself in the talis, because the rule is that a mitzvah must not be passed by, as it is written, you shall watch the matzos, which also may be read as you shall watch the mitzvahs. That is, when the opportunity to do a mitzvah presents itself, do not let it sour. Do not let it sour. Do not let it become chametz, right? So do not pass over it by delaying its fulfillment. Now, many authorities, now Rabbi included, disagree with this, and they say that b'di'evet, if for whatever reason you happen to encounter the tefillin first, you do put down the tefillin and then put on the talis first, because even though you're not allowed to pass over a mitzvah, but because the tefillin are still in their cases and in their bag, so therefore you how do you call it? It's not you could say that's not considered having encountered the tefillin, and therefore best put on the talis first. But if for whatever reason your tefillin were not in the bag and you encountered them first, then you would have to put on the tefillin first. Now this also has another very practical ramification, and that is that once you've picked up your talis, you should put it on. Don't hang around and then get distracted and put it off and take it off. Let's say you have the talis on your shoulder and you're like, oh, I'm just going to do something else first. And once the talis is on your shoulder, ideally you got to put it on. And the same is with tefillin. You may have the tefillin in your hand and you're talking to somebody and you're about to put them on, and then you're like, oh, hold on, I'm going to go and get myself a chumash, or I'm going to go and make myself a coffee. Once you're holding the tefillin in your hand, you should not put them down, because mitzvah shabali yadecha al tach mitzana. Once a mitzvah presents itself, don't delay its fulfillment. Okay. It says 4 times in the Torah to tie the tefillin on your hand, right? Twice is in Parshas Boy, which we're going to read next week. Once is in the first paragraph of the Shema, and once in the second paragraph of the Shema. Now, one of those 4 times is in Parshas Boy. The word Yodecha, let's look at the Hebrew here. The word Yodcha is usually written Yud Dalad Chaf. Yud Dalad with a long Chaf. A final Chaf. But here, in this one case, it's written in this unusual way, Yodcha, with a regular Chaf instead of a long Chaf, a final Chaf, and a He afterwards. So that word Yodcha spelled such can also be expounded to mean Yad Keha, the left hand, the weak hand, right? So it's written, shall be a sign upon your hand. Since the word Yodcha is written with a superfluous Hey, our sages of blessed memory teach that this means Yad Keha, or weak hand, referring to the left hand, which is weaker and feebler. The tefillin should be placed on the, okay, so that's why you put the tefillin on your weak hand. Which hand is, right? So some people are outright right-handed, some people are outright left-handed, and then there's people who are, there's spectrums. They do some things with their left hand, they do other things with their right hand. And it's also common, by the way, this was a big problem once upon a time. Once upon a time, not so long ago, it was common to consider somebody who was left-handed to be not favorable. And they used to try and force children to switch to being right-handed. And this has very complicated halachic ramifications, because the barometer for somebody who's left-handed in halacha, as far as tefillin is concerned, is which hand do you write with, right? If you write with your right hand, even if you do everything with your left, everything else with your left hand, you're considered a righty, and vice versa. However, that is only if you were born that way. If you were born one way and force yourself to change, then the barometer becomes different and more complicated, and that could cause issues. We're not going to get into all the questions of itir yad, of a lefty, with tefillin and ambidextrous and all those sorts of different scenarios are very complicated, and many different opinions. In fact, even within Chabad, there is certain scenarios where there is a machlokes, between the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek. And there are some Lubavitchers who I know who wear 2 tefillin. They put tefillin on the left hand for davening, and then afterwards, besides Rashi and Minatam, within that, after they take off the tefillin, they put it on again on the other hand, because there are different, in some cases, there is different opinions whether you are considered a righty or a lefty. If this is relevant to you, we could discuss this afterwards. Okay. The tefillin should be placed on the elevated part of the muscle. As it says, place these words upon your heart, which means it shall be put opposite the heart. Now, if you put it, let's see if I can demonstrate, right? If you put it, how do you get the camera to see, right? If you put it over, this is the forearm, but not the whole part is your muscle. The muscles, if you my elbow is here, and then approximately 2 finger breadths above the elbow bend is where that what's it called, the bicep, that muscle starts. So that's the place for the tefillin. So this is very important when you put on the tefillin to make sure that it's tight in its place so that as davening continues, it doesn't slip down, because if it slips down, even if it's still above your elbow, but if it's below the muscle, then that is no good. And he says here the reason for this is because it should be upon your heart. And if you look at it, when you're wearing the tefillin over here, and then if you were to put your arm down, it would literally be facing your heart. And if it's lower than the muscle, then it's going to be facing below the heart. And he's probably going to say this in a moment, that when you put on the tefillin, you don't put it flat up on the muscle, but you tilt it inward a little bit toward your body, so that if you were to put your hand down, it would literally be pointing at your heart. Tefillin should be placed in the elevated part of the muscle. As it said, place these words of mine upon your heart, which means it shall be put opposite the heart, and therefore you should place the tefillin there and incline it slightly toward the body, so that when you bend your arm down, the tefillin will be opposite your heart. Now, although regarding the shalrosh, it is written between your eyes, our sages of blessed memory knew from sacred tradition that this does not mean literally in between your eyes, which is on your nose. Rather, the proper place is from where the hair grows begin. Okay, so again, very important to get the correct placing right for the head tefillin as well. So it has to be between your eyes exactly. So it's up here on your head, but exactly between your eyes, not a little bit to the right or left. Exactly, the Alter Rebbe says it has to be 100% precisely in between your eyes. So that's why we're very careful. At least if it slips afterwards, you should try and fix it. But at least for one moment when you put on tefillin, make sure that it's exactly in the right place. And it has to be tight. The mitzvah of the shalrosh is that it should be tight on your head. So you have to, you tighten the straps. I don't want to do it right now. I'm going to put it on my yarmulke because I don't want to actually do the mitzvah now. But at night, you put your fingers in and tighten it. And when it's in that tight position, you want it to be exactly in between your eyes over here. And where does it go? It doesn't go on your nose in between your eyes. It goes up here. The proper place is from where the hair begins to grow. And this place extends to the end of the spot where the baby's scalp is soft. So your hair begins to grow over here. So if your hairline recedes as you get older, that doesn't matter. The place of the tefillin remains where your hair used to start growing once upon a time. So, I wear my tefillin approximately over there, but it shouldn't be down there. If it's down there, it's not kosher. Now, it's how far back can it go? So he says it could go as far back as to where the soft spot over here, where the baby's scalp is soft. So that's how far back you could go. And like I mentioned before, some Sfardim wear 2 tefillins, Rashi and Menatam, one on top of the other. If you're wearing small tefillin, you could fit 2 sets in between the bottom of the hairline and the soft spot over there. This means that the lower edge of the tefillin, that's this over here, again, the lower edge of the tefillin should not be lower than the place where the hair begins to grow, the hairline. And the up edge of the tefillin, which is above in the head, should not be higher than the place where the scalp of a baby is soft. Great care must be taken that the tefillin should rest in its proper place. If you place shalrosh so that even a small part is on the forehead where hair does not grow, or even if you place the entire shalrosh on the place where hair grows, but it is moved to the side and is not exactly in between your eyes, the mitzvah is not fulfilled and the bracha is in vain. The knot, that's the back of the strap over here, the knot in the back, should be placed opposite the tefillin at the back of the head, above the nape of the neck, which is the base of the skull where hair grows and is opposite the face, should not incline in either direction. Okay, so So again, the knot should be in the middle. Now, so here's the thing: if you put your hand in the back of your head over here, you could feel where the end of the skull is, and there's sort of like a little hole, or what does he call it here? I think that's what he calls the nape, where the skull ends, and there's a little bit of soft skin. So the ideal place for the knot is that it should be resting on that. So the top of the knot is on the bone, and the bottom of the knot, the knot has sort of this double-decker 2-layered knot. So the top of the knot should be on the skull, and the bottom of the knot should be just below on the soft area. If the knot is a little bit lower than that, it's still okay as long as it's still on the area where it's part of your head where your hair grows. Okay, the strap should be secure, right? I mentioned this before. It has to be. It's not just laying on your head. It should be secure. This becomes challenging sometimes if you're helping people with tefillin and they have very long hair. A ponytail, besides other issues with long hair being a problem for tefillin, which we'll see soon, it's also just a practical problem that becomes very difficult to make the tefillin tight. And if you find your tefillin slipping around a lot, it might be time for a haircut. When the bias and the space are exceedingly wide, it's difficult to maintain their tightness, and it's therefore urgent to be most careful in this matter. So also the straps, the leather does stretch over time. So you might find your tefillin are okay, and then in a few months' time, they're too loose. So you could tighten them. They're very easy to tighten, and you could come to me or to the sofa or to anybody. It's not a big deal. You just have to know how to manipulate this knot and make it a little bit tighter. Okay, the tefillin must be put on while standing. Should not shake the tefillin out of the bag because this is disrespectful to the mitzvah, but you should take them out with your hand. First put on the shaliyad, and before you tighten the knot, recite the bracha, la'aniach tefillin. The letter Hey has the vowel kametz, and the letter Lamed has the word, has a dot in it. According to our custom, the letter Dalet does not have one second. Oh yeah, sorry. The Hey has a comment. Yes, lahoniach tefillin. The letter, the lamed of the word tefillin has a dot in it. You then tighten the knot and wind the strap around your arm 7 times. Then immediately put on the shalosh. Okay. Before tightening it on your head, recite the bracha al mitzvahs tefillin. The letter. You then tighten the shalosh and say the verse Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusei Le'elam Vayed. Okay, so let me just explain what he's saying here. Again, this is not our custom. There are 2 opinions about this. Do you say one bracha l'haniach tefillin for the hand and the head tefillin, or do you say a bracha l'haniach tefillin for the hand one and al mitzvahs tefillin for the head one? So the custom that the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is recommending, which is the widespread Ashkenazi custom, I suspect our friend Rabbi Bill Russman does this, that you feel free to deny or to plead the fifth, whatever you want. He says the bracha on the head tefillin, and then you say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusei Le'elam Vayed, because according to the opinion that the head tefillin warrant their own bracha, you've said the bracha. According to the opinion that it doesn't warrant its own bracha, you said Baruch Shem, which, like we learned a few chapters ago, is what you do if you said a bracha in vain. Now, just like every mitzvah, you have to do the mitzvah, say the bracha before you do the mitzvah. So, and the hand tefillin, you say the bracha once it's on the right place of your arm before you tighten it, because tightening it, tying it, you should tie it, bind it as a sign on your arm. So that's the mitzvah. So you say the bracha before you bind it. So similarly, for those who say a bracha on the head tefillin, you get the tefillin in place, and then you say the bracha. And once you've said the bracha, you tighten the strap around your head, because like we said before, tightening it is the actual sort of clunch, doing the actual mitzvah. Now, even though it is not our custom to say the bracha on the tefillin and the head tefillin every day, it is very important to know this. Why? Because if, for whatever reason, you interrupted and you spoke between putting on the hand tefillin and the head tefillin, then you do say the bracha on the head tefillin. You don't say Baruch Shem in that case because there's no bracha in vain, according to any opinion. So all opinions agree that if you put on the hand tefillin and then you interrupted with words, that you have to say a separate bracha on the head tefillin. Now, why would you interrupt with words? You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to speak in between putting on the hand tefillin and the head tefillin. In fact, even when there's no bracha, even for example, when you put on Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin, you're not allowed to speak in between putting on the hand tefillin and the head tefillin. You have to put them on right away, right together, without interrupting. But why would you speak in between? So it could be that you forgot or you made a mistake and you did speak. But there could be a case where you do have to speak, and that is there are certain things that we answer in davening, like Amin Yehishmei Rabba, like Kaddish, Kaddish, Kaddish of Kedusha, Baruch Hu, other things which we're going to discuss. I think it's in chapter 14. In a few, we're going to, in a couple of chapters' time, there's going to be all the laws of when you interrupt which parts of davening to say which things, and I hope to be able to present it with a slideshow. It's a little bit complicated. But if, let's say, you're in the middle of putting on tefillin, and the chazan says Kedusha, so then you have to answer Kaddish Baruch and Yimelech of Kedusha, and then you put on your head tefillin, and you would say the bracha, even according to Chabad custom. Okay, let's read this inside. The reason it is necessary to say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuso Le'olam Va'ed is because when there is some doubt regarding the second bracha, and because there is a doubt regarding the bracha, there is consequently also a doubt if one hears the bracha should answer Amen or not. Therefore, it appears to me that it's preferable to recite this bracha in an undertone, so that nobody should say Amen on that bracha. After putting on the shalosh, coil the straps of the shalyad 3 times around the middle finger, once the middle section and twice on the lower section. And again, so you first wrap it on the bottom, then in the middle, then in the bottom, and then you wrap the rest around your hand. And that's the end of that. Just a moment. Okay, just to review on the last couple of sifim, a number of comments of the Alter Rebbe. So when we spoke about the placing it on the muscle of the arm, so we spoke about not putting it all the way down to the elbow, it has to be at a bit higher than that. But also on the other side, it shouldn't be on the top half of the muscle. Now, with the Chabad custom to have big tefillin, that becomes very difficult to accomplish, and especially for people who have smaller bodies and young bar mitzvah bachrim. But then, nevertheless, as much as possible, you should try. It should be as low as possible while remaining on the muscle. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch said in the beginning of number 4 that you have to put on the tefillin standing up. This is the widespread custom, although then the Siddur Alter Rebbe does bring that some people have the custom to put on the hand tefillin and make the bracha on the hand tefillin sitting down, and this is indeed the custom of some, and it's also the Chabad custom and many others as well, that before you wrap the 7 wrappings of the tefillin around your arm, you wrap 2 across the tutura on right on the top of the tefillin. And those 2 together with the original ring that the tefillin itself is strapped on create 3, which is the letter Shin. Okay. Number 5. Even if you happen to take the shalrosh from the back first, you must pass by this mitzvah and put in the shalrosh down, covering it with something, and put on the shalyad first. So again, you have to take out the shalyad first. That's you set it up in a way that you put in your hand. You know which one you're going to take out. But if for whatever reason, by mistake, you took out the shalrosh first, put it down and take out the shalyad, because the shalyad has to be put on first, even if that requires you to sort of put down the mitzvah that you've already picked up. Since the precedence of the tefillin shalyad over the shalrosh is ordained by the Torah, as it says, you shall bind them for a sign upon your arm, and they shall be titofos between your eyes, so first your arm and then your eyes. We are therefore not concerned with passing over the mitzvah. With passing over the mitzvah in this case. Nothing must intervene between the tefillin and the flesh, whether in regard to the tefillin of the arm or the tefillin of the head. So the tefillin of the arm have to be on your direct flesh, nothing in between. What it does commonly happen is that your sleeve may get caught in the first strap, so it's very important to make sure that it's not in your sleeve. Now, strictly speaking, on this section, when it's on your arm and even here on your hand and your fingers, it doesn't matter if there's an interruption in between, and a hefsek intervening between the tefillin and your flesh. It's only right there on the top where the tefillin are. Our custom is that we do make sure there's no interruptions at all. So if you're wearing a watch on your left arm, you take it off. But strictly speaking, that's okay. I believe that in the Sephardim do not take off their watches when they wear tefillin. But this becomes relevant when if somebody has a cast or a bandage or some reason that it's difficult to think. If it's on this section of the body, then that doesn't matter. You could still wrap it around. Although arguably, if you have, let's say, a cast just over here, and you have a small section over here with no cast, it may be, you could argue that it would be better to just do 7, one on top of each other, directly on your arm, than to do it over the cast. But okay, that's for nothing. Now, the tefillin, the head tefillin, have to be directly on your head. Now, short hair does not constitute a separation because it's normal to have short hair, to have hair. However, people who grow long waves of hair, besides the fact that it is detestable and arrogant to have what we call a chuk, which in and of itself is a transgression, it also causes a transgression regarding wearing tefillin. So if you have long hair in the front, besides in and of itself being arrogant and detestable, it's also another transgression because it causes you not to wear the tefillin, because the extra hair in the front of your hair is, since where the hair is excessively long and is considered an imposition, a hefsek in between the head and the tefillin. So we should be careful to have. And I actually recently heard a story where somebody asked the Rabbi about the length of his hair, and the Rabbi says it doesn't matter how long your hair is as long as the back and the front are the same length. So nowadays it's very common for people to leave bangs and fringes, but really the appropriate way for a Jew to get a haircut, for a man to get a haircut, is that whatever number you're going to do, it should all be the same across, and also that the hair shouldn't be combed. Even if you have long hair, if it's in its natural position, then it doesn't cause an imposition between the tefillin and your head. But if you're combing it, let's say, combing it all to the one side or combing it back, and it's not left to its natural position, then according to some, that could also pose an imposition between the tefillin and your head. There is actually, brings to mind right. Also, the section of the strap that goes around your head also has to not have any interruption. So make sure it's not over your yarmulke or any clips or anything like that. I seem to recall something along the lines that somebody was arguing to the Rebbe that it's better to have small tefillin, because if you have small tefillin, then more area of the surface area of the bottom of tefillin is going to be touching your head, because your skull is round and the tefillin are flat. So the smaller the tefillin are, the less of the tefillin is going to be not touching your head. And the Rebbe said, not at all. The very fact that the Torah instructs you to put something flat on a round surface means that the Torah doesn't mind that only the middle part of it is in direct contact. But you need to make sure there is nothing interrupting in position in between the head tefillin and the body. Okay. Care should be taken that the knot of the shalyad should not be moved away from the box. This is a very difficult thing sometimes, and it depends a little bit on one second. This is a little bit of a difficult thing, and it depends somewhat on what type of knot you have, the Chabad knot or other knots, but be that as it may, what he's saying here is that there's a few sections over here. Let's describe this. What's the best way to do it? How could you see it? Should we turn off the light? Will that make it better to see? Let's try that. I think that makes it a little bit better, right? Okay. This is the bias. This section around it is called the tetura. And this section over here where the strap is fed through is called the ma'abarta. Then this is the knot of the tefillin. This bottom piece is the knot. That's what constitutes the knot. And on top of it, this little piece is not structurally part of the knot, but it's there as part of the knot, and it resembles the letter Yud. Now, the knot with the letter Yud is supposed to, if possible, always be in direct contact with the tefillin, which is why in the little box that you have over the tefillin, there's a little cutout over there, so that even while the tefillin are wrapped up in their bag, it should be in direct contact with the box over there. And certainly while you're wearing it, it should be in direct contact with the tefillin, with the bias. Now, when you have the Chabad style knot, which you tie like this, imagine this is my forearm, and you tie it like this around, so you tie it twice over here, so that kind of gives you opportunity to make sure that these two wrappings can further be anchoring the knot, if you can try to make sure you can see, to be there. Now the problem is that you're not really supposed to wrap these two wrappings around the titura. You're supposed to keep them on the ma'abarta over here. So it's a little bit complicated to maneuver around, but certainly try and do your best that this is touching. Now, he's going to mention in this sieve, so I'll describe it before we read it inside. If for whatever reason, and this happens commonly in Miftaim, let's say a left-handed person is putting on tefillin of a right-handed person. So let's read it inside. The challenge is going to be, because if you're putting it on over here, so the knot is on the inside facing my body, right? If I were a lefty and putting on a right-handed person's tefillin, then it's going to be backwards. So either I have to turn it around and put it upside down, or I have to sort of feed the string around the other way and maneuver it. So he's going to address that a little bit in this seep over here. Care should be taken that the knot of the shalyad should not be moved away from the bias. And even when the tefillin are in the bag, you should be careful about this. And the letter Yud of the knot should always be facing the heart. The base into which the strap is inserted should be above the bias itself, should be below, right? So you put on the tefillin like this, the base, ma'abarta, where it feeds through it, is above the tefillin. In extreme circumstances, for example, a left-handed person who wears tefillin on his right arm and now has no other tefillin except those borrowed from someone who wears them on his left arm, or the converse, and he is unable to change the knot, and then if he wears the tefillin in this manner with the base upward and the bias downward, the yud and the knot would face outward. So therefore, in those circumstances, you may invert them and put them upside down with the base downward and the bias upward, in order that the yud and the knot face the heart.